Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I am great.
Excellent.
I have nothing witty to say to you.
But,
I'm just doing good.
okay, I'm glad to hear that. So today, what we're discussing is,
Give me a moment. There's noise in the background. I want to quiet it down. So entertain the masses while I do that.
alright, yeah, that's fine. Uh, so, the reason why I wanted to discuss this subject is, how do I want to put it?
I'm here.
Cool. Uh, what am I saying? Right. So recently, I discovered that there is a whole cottage industry about Epic the Yeah, sorry, we lied about there being a final stream about Epic the Musical. I promise you, though, it's not totally about Epic the Musical. Uh, what was I saying? Right. Sorry, I'm dealing with the tail end of a cold, and it's ruining my ability to think. So I noticed that some of the songs just felt weird when a female, and I'm sorry for uttering the word here, is singing the song as compared to the male. And this is beyond not just because the casting of Epic is flawless, absolutely crack, terrific. Um,
Yeah, I honestly can't really think of anyone who is miscast in it.
yep. So it's like, the cast is perfect. That works in its favor. But the subject matter of the songs, even if they flip the genders at the appropriate time, that is the sexes, uh, even when they flip the sexes around, it doesn't really work as well as you'd want it to. And now we're not saying these are bad singers. No, like I've got one I really like for Thunderbringer. But Thunderbringer is an incredibly masculine song. I can't
Hmm.
think of a single line that's feminine. And I don't mean in the sense of oh well, anyone can sing the song. Right, 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 right. Anyone can sing the songs and these words in this order. However, let's look at the lyrics real quick, um, and you'll see what I mean. Not only though, but Luke Holt is a fantastic singer, and I really hope we can see him again in something. But let's look at the lyrics real quick. It goes, "Pride is a damsel in distress, hiding away where only I can undress her. Try all she can not to confess. In the end, it's the same when I apply all the pressure." Now let's flip it around. Uh, Pride is a uh, monsieur in distress. That's a bad word, monsieur, but I couldn't think of anything. Hiding
I
away
understand. Yeah.
where only I can undress him. Try all he can not to confess. In the end, it's the same when I apply all the pressure. Now, if it's not a predatory gay man singing this, and instead a woman, a straight woman singing this, uh, it doesn't hit the same. Even though you're switching the sexes of his references, um, it just doesn't work the same. There's implications there of power dynamics, not even power dynamics. I don't want to use that phrase of roles within the relationship that Zeus plays out. That Zeus et just simply can't, not in the same way. Now the Greeks, this comes from the Greeks, and I think Jorge has a pretty good understanding of the Greeks. But the Greeks were clearly not prudes in the same way that people might think of today, or as prudish. After all, Artemis is their goddess of the hunt. There's also other female characters that have very masculine traits. Famously, Clytemnestra killed Agamemnon with an axe, at least in the
Hmm.
version I'm remembering. You also have various other characters, like Um, oh my goodness, the names escape me. The woman who was Atalanta. You also have characters with Atalanta, where basically the only reason she's not an Argonaut, even though she's generally accepted as one of the heroes of Greece, is because it's bad luck to have a woman on the ship, which is true. There's a certain masculine role, quote unquote, that she was allowed to take and works and is famous. And it's not like some sort of unless it was like these are hyper obscure in Greece and a feminist threw them up and published them, like that sort of thing. But no, like there's mentions of Atalanta in reference to the Argonauts. Therefore, she was somewhat mainstream. Um, you have sort of mainstream females taking masculine roles, and unlike Clytemnestra, Atalanta isn't disordered in the way that you might expect from a more modern telling. So, with that in mind, it's clear that Greeks understood when and where, at least in the literature that has survived to us today, when to have their sex roles and when to not have their sex roles. When they have the masculine and the feminine. So, it's true that anyone can say any of the set of the words, but there is something lost in the character when Zeus becomes Zeusette or something like that.
Yep. So I think what's worth discussing here too is how the Odyssey views sex and sexuality. So I would say that Jorge, one of the things he does a terrific job in Epic specifically, and this is good as a general discussion as well, is that it is updated without losing the spirit of the original, right? So what does that mean? Well, the main thing I'm thinking of that he does this extremely well with is the suitors, right? A modern reader reading the Odyssey, you see this a lot in people who are reading it and trying to give like alternate interpretations of the Odyssey, right? But the original reader of the Odyssey, you are not supposed to be sympathetic to the suitors at all, right? That
Yep.
is not what Homer wanted you to think. Now, that is not to say that a modern reader can't look at it and go, okay, well, he might not have considered it immoral, but clearly it was, right?
Right.
You could say this, for example, about like Odysseus and the sack of Ismarus, right? Which is
Right.
in the Odyssey. It happens not to be an epic, it was actually cut. Uh, but the sack of Ismarus is something that Homer clearly does not view even slightly as a moral issue. It simply does not like register in his mind. Uh, and it's clear in the story that he doesn't consider it a moral issue, but we can read it and go, yeah, plundering in a town is probably has some moral implications we should think through, right? Uh, but Homer didn't intend it. There's something very specific here about this, right? So the effect it was supposed to have to a reader of the Odyssey was that Homer was not intending you to read this section and question Odysseus' actions, right? Very important. So it's the same when you get to the suitors. The suitors in the Odyssey, sometimes to a modern eye, some people get it immediately. Like Ben, I know you've never really had this issue, but I hear from people like to a modern eye, the reaction that Odysseus has to the suitors can come off as somewhat harsh, right? Uh,
Right.
like you could go, okay, like I'm not saying that they're good people, but they didn't actually do anything yet. Antinous is planning some sort of plot, but believe it or not, unlike what they show in Epic, and this gets to my point in a moment, Antinous is not planning it with all of the suitors, right? He's planning it with like a small group of them. And yet they kill all of them, and this is considered just. It's in fact it's considered so just that at certain times Athena even intervenes to make sure that all of the suitors are killed, right? So
Yep.
it's very like you are not supposed to be sympathetic at all to the suitors. Now, you are supposed to, I would argue at least, and this is something you do in Epic as well, you can reflect on the brutality being used, but it's less of a discussion of did the suitors deserve it, and more of, wow, the sort of person who would do this is quite intense. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference in emphasis. Uh,
Yes.
and this is one of the things I think Epic does really well because Jorge makes some subtle changes to the suitors that, in my opinion, actually serves to make them as hateable as Homer intended them to be. Because when you read the Odyssey, if you were a Greek, it would have been obvious to any Greek, and this is true, like if you read any scholar, right, they will tell you this, it would have been obvious to any Greek that the suitors deserved what was coming to them because they were exploiting the hospitality of Penelope. Hospitality is a major theme of the Odyssey. In fact, it's a theme of the Odyssey that didn't really make its way into Epic, except very obliquely. Uh,
Yeah.
it's a much more prominent theme of the Odyssey. We see it pop up at Polyphemus's cave. We see it pop up on Circe's island. We see it pop up, of course, with the suitors, right? And on the island of Thracia, which is an incident that, again, is not an epic. Over and over and over and over again, hospitality, hospitality, hospitality. So if Polyphemus the Cyclops represents a bad host, then the suitors are bad guests. They're taking advantage of the hospitality of Odysseus and his family. This is a major offense in ancient Greece. It's a grave insult, right? It's also the reason, by the way, that very, very silly reinterpretations where you're supposed to be sympathetic to the Cyclops are obviously wrong, right? The Cyclops goes so far as to say, I don't really care about Zeus, which immediately would have marked him as a villain, right? It would be like saying, it would be like going in the name of God, please, help me. And we go, I don't care for your God. Like, this is not a good person,
Great
right?
villain moment, though. Great
Great
villain
villain.
moment.
Oh yeah, it's a good villain moment, but like you're not supposed to be sympathetic to the
Yeah.
Cyclops at all. And also noteworthy, Jorge makes some changes there too, but that's not what I'm discussing right
Yeah,
now.
I think in Epic's not really defense, but like just to make it clear to the watcher, it's more when you have a limited medium that you can't just lengthen forever and be okay like a musical. Some things get dropped, like nobody's saying it's bad because it doesn't have the hospitality thing. It's just
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
that
not
makes sense.
criticizing Epic.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'm just
it's not a it's
yeah,
not a critique. It's just a discussion. In fact, I'm actually praising it because what I'm saying
yes,
is when you read the Odyssey, the suitors are supposed to be hateable, but the reason that they're hateable specifically is their abuse of, I think it would be called xenia specifically,
that's
but
right.
like the Greek term, but it's hospitality is like the closest translation. And by the way, this is not something that was unique to Greece. This is also a biblical virtue that has kind of been lost over the years, but it's very, very clear in the Old Testament. You could see it in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yep.
Uh, but yeah, like hospitality is a major thing, and to abuse it was like to abuse a godly virtue. You know, like you're trespassing on things that are sacred. So anybody reading this would have immediately been like, well, clearly the suitors are horrible people who have to die.
Yep.
And but it can be a little bit difficult to convey the gravity of that offense to modern viewers. So Jorge makes a change. And the change he makes is that he has Antinous explicitly talk about killing Telemachus and gang raping Penelope, but instead of doing it with a small band of people where he's just the worst of the suitors, right? He does it with everyone and they all join in on it and they
Yep.
actually get into the plan. They're reveling, they're partying, they're getting whipped up into a frenzy by Antinous. So this functions quite brilliantly, I think, very concisely, in the same way that a Greek reader would have read the Odyssey and been like, well, they're trespassing on the sacred virtue of hospitality. Clearly, they need to die. Anybody reading or listening to, I mean, Epic, would go, well, these are, monsters who are about to commit a horrible act of violence against Penelope and Telemachus. clearly they need to die.
Yep.
So the focus in the Song Odysseus and in the Death of the Suitors in the Odyssey is not necessarily on, you're not supposed to be wondering, well, do the suitors deserve it or not? Because in both cases they do. It correctly turns the focus on what level of brutality the protagonist is willing to use, right? So
Yes.
it's a subtle difference, but it's an important change. And yeah, I think that's important too. One of the things about the Odyssey is that women in the Odyssey are kind of interesting. They're viewed in a very specific way, right? Sex is the main power that women hold in the Odyssey, right? Uh, and it is very powerful. It is very desired. It's very important, right? This is essentially the only bargaining chip that Penelope has, right? Is
Yep.
sex. Now, you could say like procreation, true, but connected sex, right?
Right. The
Cersei's power,
suitors the suitors clearly only care for Penelope for her power and then her beauty.
yes. And however, it is true. I'm pretty sure although I could be misremembering this, I think Antinous is planning on raping her in the Odyssey, but I
Yes.
could be wrong about that. In Epic, it's explicit. Uh, I think Antinous at least is,
Yes.
but
No, well,
yeah, like
what I'm saying is that the purpose of the suitors isn't some virtuous, the kingdom must go on. There's nothing virtuous that the suitors are up to. Um,
yeah,
it's they're not there because they're worried that Ithaca will fall if it doesn't have a king. They're worried that one of the other suitors will get the crown of Ithaca before they do.
yes. So when you read the Odyssey, the power of women is always expressed through sex. Women are
Yep.
not powerless in the Odyssey. This is very not true, actually. Women are very powerful in the Odyssey, sometimes more powerful than the hero. But that power, with the lone exception of Athena, who's always like been kind of a wild card, uh, and may be worth a discussion on her own. But
Yes.
women are always their power is expressed through sex. Cersei's island, Cersei has magical powers, yes, but she's going to kill Odysseus in sex until Odysseus uses Moly and then extracts a promise from her, like a verbal promise, which is implied to be magically binding, right? That
Yes.
she is not going to sap him of his manly vigor. Uh,
His
like
vril.
that's and this is the thing that breaks Cersei. Think about this for a moment. She has the power to turn men into animals, but Cersei is completely transformed into an ally when Odysseus robs her of the power of sex. Right? That's the card that without it, she's nothing. Right?
Yep.
Uh, Nausicaa, when she sees Odysseus, immediately wants to marry him because marriage, which is again connected with sex, right? Like, and of course you get to Calypso. Calypso in the Odyssey, even much more explicitly, by the way, than in Epic the Musical, is a sex abuser. Homer is actually really, really, really explicit about this in a kind of shocking way, right?
Yep.
He's straight up the lines are like along something like Odysseus did not want to sleep with her. He really he really didn't, but she forced him. And Odysseus was deeply depressed and would spend his days like staring out into the ocean, longing for death. Like Calypso is straight up a sex abuser in the Odyssey.
What a mid does to a man when he's got a queen waiting at home.
Amazing. You've somehow managed to take a woke feminist talking point and turn it completely misogynistic. I'm in awe. Uh,
My power.
it's beautiful. No, really though, like Calypso's power, like what does she do with her godlike power over Odysseus? She utilizes it through sex. And finally, the last thing is that Penelope, of course. What is the power that Penelope has? Well, if you're her husband, you're the king. And to be the king means you get to sleep with Penelope, which means you get to have children, procreation, childbirth, sex. That is the power that Penelope holds. It's the one card she has, and it's the thing that she's wielding against the suitors, right? And Penelope is really fascinating because she is a beloved and but very, very feminine and powerful, by the way, but very, very feminine character, right? Uh, she is using all of her feminine wiles. Like it is implied in the Odyssey that basically her entire political cachet has been used up in these 20 years. All of her cleverness, all of her wiles have bought her just enough time for Odysseus to get back, right? The delaying tactics are entirely feminine in nature, right? Why is she making a shroud for Laertes, right? Who is Odysseus's father? Well, because when she marries a suitor, she is no longer going to be in Odysseus's family. So this is the last thing she could do for a member of Odysseus's family, right before she leaves. It's a very
Yep,
feminine
yep.
thing. She's playing off social norms, right? And she is like playing these off for as long as she can until a maid betrays her. Uh, and then the challenge itself. The challenge is a challenge to male ego, right? You need to be able to string my husband's bow, specifically, right? And shoot through these 12 axes because my husband can do it. If you think you're worthy to be my husband, you can't even string his bow, right? And you think you're worthy to be my husband. It's a very masculine challenge, right? Because that's one of the things, like, it's one of the genius parts of the
Yep.
Odyssey is why do they accept the challenge? Nobody ever really questions this, right? Because it's male psychology. It's not stated out loud, but it's implied, right? They accept the challenge because nobody wants to admit that they're a lesser man than Odysseus, meaning that they're not worthy of being her husband. Penelope is expertly using male egos against them, right?
Yep. Until Antinous breaks the spell. Like there's
Antinous breaks the spell, but
mm,
at that point, Odysseus has showed up,
yeah.
so it works.
There's like working as a bouncer. There I'm sorry, dude, I'm hearing an echo from you.
Hmm.
Uh working as a bouncer, there's something you kind of have to learn it, and you should learn this in your real life too. But as a bouncer, you're gonna learn it real fast, or you're not gonna have a great time. It's that the women lie, and they play off things, and then they'll play innocent, even though they just broke a dude's nose because he's an ex-boyfriend or something. I saw last night a dude basically a woman went up to him, said something to him, and he said "f you," and then he got real mad at her. I don't know what she said, but she broke down crying in front of him. Made him look real bad. I'm like, buddy, I don't know what's going on, but this looks bad. You got to stop. Sort of thing. Maybe they knew each other, maybe they didn't. Who knows? But point is that there's a few women who are as violent as, or try to be as violent as the men, but they're very few and far between. There's no like if Penelope could have waved her hand and went, "Okay, guards, throw the suitors out of here," she would have done so. There was no question about it. It's clear that there's no military power that she had that was Odysseus's role that he fulfilled. Like if for the song Odysseus, which is about Odysseus massacring the suitors with his son Telemachus, if it was Penelope doing that, you have to kind of rework it so it's Penelope coming home to boy toy Odysseus, which is very not the character at all. Uh, the choices that the writer or the author or the writer, author, whatever, screenwriter, the musical director, etc., has to take is if they have these things going on, how do you fulfill the role that's there that the reader, listener, whatever will naturally accept. We don't accept these events because it's the Odyssey and we like the Odyssey and we like Greek myths. We accept these events because we understand not just we like them, but because there is a natural order that is promoted within these stories. that every character is as they should be. Atalanta is a freak and everyone agrees. Artemis is kind of a
Hmm.
freak. Everyone agrees. Not that you would tell that to her face or anything like that, but it's like, she shows up and, some guy watches her bathe and he gets turned into a stag and torn apart by his own dogs. There is a
Yeah,
natural.
there's a fascinating moment in the Iliad where Artemis tries to fight Hera, and Hera, who is the goddess of marriage, right, and the queen of the gods, basically says, "Sit down, child," and like teaches her a lesson. She like bitch slaps Artemis back to who like runs off crying because Hera completely dismantles her,
Yes.
right? But it's a really interesting scene because Artemis is in many ways like the feminist of the gods, right? And even in ancient Greece, I think she probably would have been viewed this way, though not with that language. But she would have been viewed as like she's the least feminine of the gods. But true femininity in Hera, right, is stronger than Artemis, effortlessly so, right? Because Artemis is doing something that is not natural for her. Uh, Once again, Athena is the odd exception here. However, it is to be noted that Athena is not the queen of the gods. In fact, the reason that her role, that she does as well as she does, is that she is the favored daughter of Zeus, and she represents Zeus's will uh, more perfectly than other gods. Also, as a virgin goddess, like Artemis, to be fair, but as a virgin goddess, she
Maybe
sacrifices a.
Artemis.
I've heard that Artemis was considered a virgin goddess, but I could be wrong.
There's some
Uh,
rumors about her and Orion. Listen, I'll send you the gossip mags later.
ooh, ooh, I'm into it now. Uh, but Athena, as a virgin goddess, also has to sacrifice a core part of her femininity and feminine power in exchange for her skill at warfare, right? Which is something I've discussed in the past in various articles that is literally as old as Greek myth. And even then, Athena's power isn't really her own so much as her as a an agent of Zeus, right? Uh, that's the reason that she's so beloved and respected as a goddess is that she is the favored daughter and the who of Zeus who does his will constantly. Athena is an interesting one to talk about because she's much loved by the Greeks. Arguably the second most beloved goddess to Zeus, right? Uh, and yet, there's like some interesting things going on with her when you discuss like her lore and her role among the gods. The Romans, for the record, although I'm not that they had any problem with Minerva, she was not their number two god. Their number two god was Mars. And the Romans are generally viewed as a much more masculine society. So make of that what you will.
There was an interesting thread by, I think it was maybe Alaric the Goth or Barbaric Disciple, about the Roman masculine war religion, where they had a triad of gods that was like Mars, Zeus, and Quirinus or something like that. Where there's implications that Mars and Ares isn't a one-to-one comparison. The It is interesting because they got absorbed into the Hellenic culture, but they already had the Hellenic culture in there.
Yeah,
It's
it's kind of
interesting.
fascinating because Ares, if you read the Iliad, is very much a gamma. Uh, like it's weird, right? Like he's constantly the Greeks. It's a little weird. It's hard to put this exactly. It's very difficult to get the vibe right. So many thousands of years removed from the religion, but I want to say he wasn't very respected among the gods, but that's not exactly true because he was still an Olympian, right? So you have to be careful when you say things
Right.
like that. But at the same time, if you read his myths, he is very, very often the butt of jokes. The preferred war god is Athena. Ares himself, like people will sometimes you'll see people say that he was like, oh, the god of Sparta. This is actually completely false. I understand where it comes from. It kind of feels like Sparta should have that vibe, but nope. Sparta's god, if anyone, if they had a god, it would be Athena, if anything. Um,
Oh yeah, they
yeah,
punished people who gave into the rage of battle severely, because they broke the hoplite line.
Hmm. So it's kind of weird, right? Like I understand why people think it's Ares, but it's actually not Ares. Uh, yeah. So the way the Romans view Mars and the Greeks view Ares is definitely not the same, right? Like, are they the same god? I mean, I think they would have viewed it probably if you had asked them, they would say, yeah, the Greeks just didn't really understand, right? Like, is probably how a Roman would say. It's like, oh, so when they hear, oh, there's a male war god in Greece, you go, oh yeah, that must be Mars, right? And then you go, oh, but like, what about Athenians? Go, oh, they just don't understand Mars, right? We understand him better.
Well, it's like when they met with the Germanic pagans and they came to somebody that's like a Wotan Odin analog. They actually was like, oh, he's like Hermes. And it's like,
Yeah, exactly. That's my thought, and that's probably how Ares and Mars got conflated. I mean, obviously all the Greeks got conflated into the Roman pantheon, uh, but that specific conflation was they already had like a male. They probably already had some form of male war god that they were worshiping, and then when they learned that the Greeks had a male war god, they just said, "Oh, that must be Mars, right?" And then they just said like, "Well, the Greeks didn't understand him like we do. You know, they never they didn't understand what a great god he was, right?" Uh, I mean, it's weird because we're so many thousands of years removed. To say that they didn't respect Ares, I don't think is quite true, because he's he's an Olympian, right? Like he's still one of the 12 greatest gods. You know, nobody would dare speak ill of Ares or anything like that, lest they be murderfied. You'll sometimes see people now. There's like this new weird modern trend I've noticed in comment sections. You're like, oh, Ares is the protector of women. He's actually a nice god. Best as I could tell, so off the basis of like a couple of myths, where that's not really what he was doing. It's more like he was taking revenge on behalf of certain women. But yeah, when you look at the masculine, let's try. I'm gonna try and get back on track because
yeah,
these discussions fascinate me, but it's easy for me to get sidetracked because the discussions fascinate me. So when you look at the masculine and feminine energy, like there is something very specific to the songs. Take the challenge. We'll use a feminine example. The challenge is Penelope's song in Epic the Musical. I love the challenge. It's very near to the S tier for me of all songs in Epic. One of 'em- and it's so good to me because in some ways it's like the Penelope song for me, right? Like it's like if I imagined a song that was representing Penelope as a character, the challenge nails her, gets all of it perfectly, right? Uh, it is not a weak song, but it is a very feminine song, right? If there were a male cover of the challenge, I'm not saying it would be bad, but the appeal of a male cover would simply to hear the novelty of it. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't be
yes,
because, oh, this is a better version of the song. And I'm not saying that's itself a bad thing. Sometimes the novelty is worth listening to, right? Like um it could be interesting to hear somebody with a really good voice cover a song. There's a whole genre of this, right? You can find people doing like twisted covers and things, um, and it's interesting, but it's interesting for the novelty. The challenge is a song that could not be properly gender bent. It wouldn't work, right? Like it simply couldn't work. Uh, the way that Penelope handles her issue, how she comes at it again, like we were discussing earlier, she doesn't come at the issue head on. She comes at it from a kind of clever side way. And it's always with the intention of, right, what she say in the song, that she's waiting, right? It's always with the
yep,
intention of Odysseus ultimately coming back, right? Penelope is not going to solve this problem on her own. She doesn't try to solve the problem on her own, never even attempts it, right? It would be foolish if she did. Her role is to delay, right?
right.
There's a
And as
wonderful.
just as a sort of look at it, it's like these suitors, even though they're rich layabouts, there's still men who have enough violence in them to go and fight wars and stuff like that. You know, they were hoplite trained, or at least whatever the equivalent was of that time.
Yes, Penelope is in an extremely dangerous situation, as is Telemachus. The fact that she's delaying, that's the other thing too. It's about the virtue of Penelope. The very fact that Penelope is willing to delay for as long as she is shows her character, right? Because what she's doing is putting herself at very serious, grave danger, right? The second her political cachet runs out, right, she could die very, very quickly. Certainly, she will be violently hurt, gang raped, right? Um, and the fact that she's willing to delay as long as she does shows the strength of her character. That it's about her love for Odysseus specifically, right? The thing is, this is an entirely positive thing, right? The delay is seen as a good thing. You know, like you can contrast this a little bit with what's going on with Odysseus, especially in Epic, less so in the original Odyssey. In Epic, Odysseus's motivations throughout the story are that he just wants to. He says it in "Just a Man," right, which is the "I Want" song of the show. Uh, One of a couple of "I Want" songs, because "Full Speed Ahead" is also kind of an "I Want" song. But "Just a Man," he very, very clearly expresses his motives. I'm just a man who's trying to go home. And then deep down, I would trade the world to see my son and wife, right? Which is literally what he does later, right? He trades his entire crew for the chance to see his son and wife. Uh, Odysseus's actions, though, are definitely portrayed as somewhat morally ambiguous, right? Not necessarily badly, but the fact that he's willing to betray his brothers in arms and comrades in order to see Penelope and Telemachus doesn't necessarily reflect well on him. It's not black and white and isn't presented that way, but Odysseus himself feels terribly guilty about this. It affects him psychologically in a way that we don't see with Penelope and her delay, right? Penelope's delay is only shown in an entirely positive way. Now, obviously, of course, there's a big difference in that she's not betraying people when she's doing this, but on the flip side, that's kind of the point, right? Masculine versus feminine obligations here. You know, brothers at arms have their own sort of set of obligations to them that a wife would not necessarily override, right? That's one of the points of the Iliad, even. And that's why I think people who try and portray Patroclus and Achilles' relationship romantically get it terribly, terribly wrong, right? It misses the point of the Iliad. There are different obligations on the sexes. You know, that Penelope is honorable in doing anything she can and getting Odysseus back, but Odysseus has obligations that are arguably higher than his obligation to Penelope that he needs to keep in mind, right? Uh, because men have more responsibility, but the responsibility of women is to their man. Do you get what I'm saying, or am I being somewhat confusing?
No, you're making perfect sense.
And this is biblical, right? Because you read St. Paul says this. Man is in the image of God, woman is in the image of man, right? Uh, and he also says that men are the head of the family, and women are in the position of the church, as man is in the position of Christ, right? One of service versus self-sacrificial love. Uh, but that self-sacrificial love and that leadership role sometimes will involve making decisions that affect more than just the immediate party, if that makes some sense. I'm trying to get this out and I'm having trouble wording it, but I hope that what I'm saying makes sense in your head, right? Like
Yeah,
what I'm
there's
trying to get
duties and
across.
responsibilities between the man and the woman, for the man and the woman, as there are duties and responsibilities from Christ to man. Like there's
Yes.
Adam's job was not to just laze around in the garden. His job was to be a steward for the garden. You know, we are stewards of this earth. Um, its perversion is something like environmentalism, or on the other hand, exploitativism. I guess we'll call it.
Right.
Uh,
Historically, in Christian history, the sin that the original sin is referred to not as the sin of Eve, even though she sinned first, but the sin of Adam.
yeah,
Why? Because Adam was the representative of the human race. Eve was not.
yeah,
Right? Adam is the one who represented us before God. Eve didn't. Adam's failure was a failure of leadership. He let his wife lead him. She disobeyed him. That was her sin. Adam's sin was listening to his wife when she tried to lead him in defiance of God's orders.
yep. And that's the important thing here. It's not necessarily listening to the wife is the sin or anything. It's that the wife was sinning, tried to drive Adam into sin, and it damned the whole race until Christ came back. So
Yeah,
that's kind of
precisely.
what we're dealing with here. And as a to sort of think about the Odyssey, and what we're talking about with sex roles and whatnot, uh, it's you know you see, like Anthony said, you see in the Odyssey where the women have their power. I see it quite often. In my job, where a little flirtation to try and get a drink out of a man. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. You can't
Yeah,
talk to me like
women
that.
are
I'm a woman.
incredibly powerful. Like,
Yes.
there's no question about that. But the power is manifested in a very different way.
Yes.
Um, it's also not necessarily it's not necessarily sexual in the sense that you might think of like that it's going to lead to sex. It's not necessarily wearing skimpy clothes, right? That's a simplistic way of doing it and can work, but it gets a lot more complex than that. Like, for
Yes.
example, how does St. Paul talk about it? He says that a woman is saved through motherhood, right? That uh, now, I don't know what your opinion is of this, Ben, but the Catholic tradition has always interpreted that to mean it could also be spiritual motherhood, which is why we have orders of nuns. Uh, but nevertheless, right? It's a very specific thing. What's the thing that will save women? Their role as mothers, right?
Right.
And that's and Paul doesn't connect it to sex specifically. Sex is a means to an end, though, right? Like, how do you become mother? Well, you become mother through sex or through a form of spiritual motherhood where you're giving up a lesser good for a spiritual good, right? Uh, I say lesser to mean, but lesser good. It's still good, right? But
Right.
spiritual goods are higher. So, okay, thinking of keeping that in mind, like one of my favorite characters, and we'll switch examples here, is Gina from Porco Rosso.
Yes.
Right, Ben, you love Porco Rosso, so
Great
I don't
character.
need to go through the plot. Gina is a great character. Gina represents a sort of glamour girl archetype, but one of the most interesting things about Gina is that while her power is extremely feminine and she uses her femininity to wield it, it is not overtly sexual in the crude or base way, right? Um,
Yep.
like in fact, they would be in the movie. I suspect if somebody had tried to imply something like that about Gina, all of the men in the bar would get offended on her behalf, right? Like, how
Yep.
dare you make such, imply such things about Gina? Apologize, right? Um, because Gina is a good woman. However, Gina's power is that she has these people who are criminals from rival gangs all coming to her bar, right? And she walks over to them when they're arguing with each other, about to get into a fist fight, and says, "Hey, you're not fighting here, are you?" And they immediately go, "Oh no, Miss Gina, we would never fight in your bar," right?
Right. Right.
The scene's comical, but it's not unrealistic, right? You can easily imagine such a person existing, right? Like, or such people existing. You know,
Yes.
there's a realism to it. She's wielding her femininity in a very specific way. Go ahead, Ben.
Yes. Uh, Well, I was gonna say it's like no one's deceived. Everyone understands that they were about to get into a fight with each other. The difference is that, one, Gina kind of forgives them for about to have a fight, and she's able to extract a promise, which of course, now that she's reminded them of what's going on, they're going to honor. Like it's on its face, it's very simple. You boys aren't gonna fight here. Oh no, Gina, we never fight here. We're the best of friends. That's right, that's right. And she moves on. It's more, if they weren't so hot blooded, they never would have thought to fight in the first place. Uh, if but they wouldn't be them if they weren't hot blooded. It's a great character moment, but it's like the character work is already there, establishing that these guys, respect Gina and her premises and who she is and all this jazz. They honor her in a way, in a sort of Queen Penelope way, if the suitors were, not evil. Uh, and Gina has the ability to control them to a certain extent within her bounds. Like if she suddenly showed up to a thing and it said, "You guys gotta stop being air pirates," they're like, "No." But if she showed up, "Hey, listen, you guys got one of my bar girls for ransom." "Oh, Gina, we didn't know. We're so sorry." This idiot, and he'd like punch a random sky pirate. "This idiot didn't know. I knew from the start." And he'd grab, the girl that she wanted and give her back to her. It's one of those things where there's rules to the engagement. She can't stop them from being who they are, but she can force them to respect who she is. And that's a very important kind of difference between what people think of when they say women are powerful versus the actual women are powerful. There's excuse me. They attack. Um, like there's various if you work in a restaurant, many of them have their servers being women because women tend to get more tips. If it's not like a high class bar that values
Hmm.
service over entertainment. Well, guess what? Most of them don't want to really do their jobs. There's only like one or two of them that are actually good servers objectively, but they're very pretty girls. But then there's like some older woman who's like 45, and I respect the hell out of her over the other prettier girls, not because of some sort of like I like the older ladies meme sort of thing, but because one, she knows what she's talking about and she's connected to the family that owns the place, not by marriage or anything, but, she's an old retainer. She's been around the block more than a few times. If she wants something done, she gets it. If she says, "Ben, help me with this," "Hey, et cetera, other bouncers, I need you guys to help me with this," we jump to it. Not because she could fire us, not because of anything special. If there was something going on we had to attend to, we'll be like, "Yeah, wait a minute, we'll get back to you after we break up this fight or whatever." But like there's a respect that can exist between the sexes if people kind of get what's going on. She knows that we're security guards and she wouldn't ask us for help unless she needed the help. We know that she'd only ask for help if she needed it. There's if and how do I want to put it? Like, and this can sort of like be pushed up, to like say a corporate gig. The woman who fights and scraps for every bit of male attention is not the same as the old secretary who's been there 30 years and knows everyone and everything and has a few favors coming to her. Like there's a power difference. Whatever the, HR manager who's overblown thinks she is, the secretary is. But at the same time, the secretary intrinsically knows what she can and cannot ask for. If she's like, "Look, could you take a look at, I looked at the numbers and I think these numbers are bad." "Yeah, absolutely. You've been here 30 years. You know when the numbers look good." But if she said, "You need to fire this VP because I don't like them," they'd be like, "No." That's not going to happen. There's differences. It's hard. it's something that was more understood without having to be explained in earlier times. The wife of the butler was respected not just because she was the wife of the butler, but because she was often the cook and the ladies' maid, the one who trained the maids and stuff like that. It's the same with the lord's wife. They respected her because she was, the lord's wife. But in reality, she's not expected to go to war. She's not expected to, do anything that a lord would be expected to do in the same way that the lord is being expected. Penelope didn't go to war with Odysseus. In fact, none of their wives went. None of their wives, went with the Achaeans to Troy. The reason why the wives were at Troy were because that was the home city of the Trojans, so they had nowhere else they could be. Andromache doesn't put on her husband's armor when he dies or anything like that. In fact, she basically tells him to take it off because it's scaring the boy. There's duties and responsibilities and rights that are natural to the existence of, the male and the female, the woman and the man, with the husband and the wife. These things are natural in the arts themselves. It's why things like whatever Lena Dunham was up to in the 2010s and stuff like that really failed so miserably and were only interests because they appealed to that ugly millennial woman character that grew up at that time. There's whole like if Gina tried to punch out a sky pirate, they probably wouldn't even register it as an attack. I've certainly been there where like it's like, oh wait a minute, you're kicking my shins. What's going on here? She's actually trying something. Hey, you gotta stop that. Or I'm gonna ask you to leave. Kick, 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 kick. All right, lady, if you won't calm down, it doesn't matter that it's starting to hurt after a bit. It doesn't matter anything like that. There's a difference in strength and skill and ability that just can't be overcome. Like in some fighting arenas, they have this dude that's like Butterball from way back when, if you remember that. It was this enormously fat boxer. Uh,
Yep.
and he fights, 1 to 3 women or something like that. And he doesn't really hurt them. He's not really hurting them, but he's picking them up and throwing them around, knocking them down. He's got padded gloves. They get hurt a bit because getting knocked down hurts, but it's like you also agreed to a circus show. You know, it doesn't matter that you're perfectly respectable MMA fighters in your own right with, even positive scores. This dude is just a man and he can take more punishment. He's stronger, and quite frankly, you just don't have the requisite levels to hurt him without a knife or a gun. And quite frankly, just a gun, you know, unless you get the drop on him. It's so this stuff, like I said, translates into the art that's being made. Penelope cannot slaughter the suitors. Maybe she could poison one, and maybe she can poison a bunch of them, but eventually she'd be found out and killed for it. She can, you know, do something clever, but frankly, the maids betray her. Not all of them, but some of them do. Uh, and what can she do about that? She really can't. If she tried to kill the maid for betraying her to Antoninus, she's gonna get that backfired on her because the suitors are 108 men of military might, and while there might be guards, they can suddenly spring upon them unaware. Less men have taken whole cities from Sparta. Peloponnese did so. And he had, a handful of men, and he basically went to various garrisons of his own countrymen, roused them to anger, and then at the appropriate day where a snowstorm was hitting Thebes, I think it was Thebes, he, broke them free of the yoke of the Spartans, and that was done with less than 108 men, and from what I remember. you know, it's important to understand these things when you're creating art. You know, people know, people feel it. You know, the people who don't feel it are often damaged or destroyed themselves, or have issues that they have to, work through. You know, they're unsaved. They're confused about themselves and in sin. The understatement of how broken they are is simply not at hand. Uh, if you look at things like, there's Shockwave. It's a book about the dropping of the atomic bomb. Everyone involved, except for maybe one or two secretaries and a woman who turned out to be a spy, were men. You know, is that unnatural? Absolutely not. Why did they produce several black women work at NASA movies? Is it because black women work at NASA? No, it's because they wanted to create the implication that black women work at NASA. And those movies failed.
Yep.
No one remembers their name. They, you didn't remember them until I brought them up to you again. Um,
Hmm.
if we were to look at other stories. Something from Enid Blyton makes sense, but she wrote actually very careful sex roles into her stories. And I don't mean in a like obligatory sense, is that's what she delighted in. Same with things like Beowulf. Is there even a woman in Beowulf? I don't think so. Oh wait, yeah, there's Grendel's mother. Excuse me, the monster. The monster who isn't the one charging out every night to Hrothgar's hall to murder men, but rather she only does so when the son she loves is hurt and wounded. If we look at other stories, and I know I'm going over this stuff, but it's very important. You have the various Nightland stories. Hodgson was a Christian man, but there were many different movements of modernism beginning to work, avant-garde. And he himself was on the avant-garde of cosmic horror. He stands tall. He should stand tall with Lovecraft, but he's mostly forgotten, along with others. But in actuality, the story is the man goes on the quest to save the woman. The woman plays with uh, in their first incarnation, because it's a story of reincarnation. She has her maid dress up as a man to torment the main character, and eventually they come to blows because she keeps sniping at him, and eventually he's like, "Why is this churl speaking to me this way?" And he smacks him on the mouth, which between men is in a proper masculine society is acceptable. And she freaks out. How dare you strike my handmaiden? And the guy's like, she's dressed as a man. What are you talking about? This is dumb. And eventually he can't stay away with her, so he goes back. And she forgives him. And it's a great romance. But at the same time, he doesn't accept blame because she's dressed as a man. He goes, "What do you mean? Why were you doing this? This was dumb." And so on and so forth. Like it's hard to understand it if you live outside the real world. Where the men are as weak as the women in many regards, especially in liberal communes. Where they are skinny fat, obsessed with soylent. They're not men at all in any real sense. But then, like there's the joke that, becoming a bodybuilder turns a man right wing. Because the fundamental character of the man changes into what is masculine. He goes from some sort of degenerate eunuch from a Conan story into something more like Conan compared to the real world, and then starts reaping the rewards of it. Um, if you were to, speaking of gyms, if you were to go to the gym just to say, what the differences between men and women, what I'm baseline at, where at certain points was my warm up, is the maximum for some of the women there, and they're some of the strongest women in the country. And it's not, I don't mean this isn't a brag. It's just saying, hey, look, this fat dude, who isn't taking it very seriously is as strong as top 20 contenders for world's strongest woman. And it's no, not world's strongest, sorry, nationally strongest women. And there's something to be understood from that. Sure, if the world's strongest woman punched you in the face, it doesn't matter. You're probably going unconscious unless you're a top ranked fighter, because that's the world's strongest woman. There she's got a 400-pound deadlift. She's got a several hundred-pound bench press. But at the same time, so did the man she punched. It barely made her equal. So if, let's say, Penelope got jacked, right? Pulled up her bow, and I know I'm ranting, but I'm going to end with this. Pulled out, Odysseus's bow and could somehow string it up. She still it would feel immensely unnatural for her character to do that. Just like it would be unnatural for, and John C. Wright proved this in Awaken the Nightlands, just like it would be unnatural for a woman to go out into the night, so too, it would be unnatural for, Penelope to take vengeance in the way she did, or for Grendel's mother to be the initiator of Beowulf, of the Hrothgar Hall massacres, or what's one more good one? Or Pride and Prejudice to be gender flipped, sex flipped, excuse me. You know, these things ripple and they affect each other, and you can always tell in a good work.
Yep. So yeah, there's I think Cry of the Night Hound is a great example here. We've discussed it before because even though it is not my favorite of John's Nightland stories, in many ways it's the one that is like worth talking about the most, right? There's so much because there's just so much going on in it. Uh and it's executed extremely well, by the way. Especially the ending. But yeah, in Cry of the Night Hound, which is one of the Nightland stories by John C. Wright, it's a retelling of the myth of Antigone. So the main character is literally Antigone. Her brother is out in the Nightland, and his body is being defended by night hounds, which means that his soul has not been devoured yet. Right? So Antigone desires to bring her brother's body back to the last redoubt, where she is hoping that the earth current can perhaps revive him, like it did Murdath the Beautiful in the original Nightland story. And at the very least, by getting his body back without his soul getting devoured, he can reincarnate, right? So the plot of the story is that she tries to get various men in her life to try and help her. None of them are taking her seriously because, to be frank, what she's asking is unreasonable, right? He's being defended by night hounds. He broke the laws of the last redoubt, and to send somebody out to rescue him would be to put more people in danger. He is effectively a lost cause, right? Uh, what she's asking for is not fair. However, she notes that this is a lack of manliness, right? It is, and she's correct, that the men are betraying her. To think this way is pragmatic, but it's not manful, right? No man would ever, self-respecting person would ever leave a comrade out to die if they could do something about it, right? And according to Antigone, they could. So she resolves to do it herself. Now, Antigone manages to survive, but the reason that, and to even succeed in her quest, but she manages to succeed because the entire quest was a fool's errand to begin with. In other words, everybody who told her not to do it and that she shouldn't do it was correct all along, in a sense, right? Which is the genius of Cry of the Night Hound, is that there are layers to the story. Antigone is only permitted to succeed because they were trying to trick humans into letting creatures of the Nightland into the last redoubt, and they almost do it. Right?
Yep.
Uh, they they very nearly succeed in tricking Antigone into it. Um, Now, again, the genius of the story is that they are right in the pragmatic, rational level, but Antigone's love is not wrong. And her brother's love, even for the creatures of the Nightland, even for night hounds, right? Uh, it's like love between man and animal. The love was not wrong. Love is stronger than death. That's the overriding theme of the Nightlands, right?
Yes.
And because of Antigone's sacrifice, because she did this, even though it was a trick, even though it was wrong, just like in the first story, right? When who was it who rescues Carithus? What was the name of the main character? Was he
Uh,
Telemachus?
yes, I think so.
Yeah. Just like in the first story, when Telemachus goes to rescue Carithus, even though he knows he might be being tricked, because Carithus won't tell him the master word, which, by the way, Pericles is doing intentionally because he's being forced to try and lure Telemachus out, and he doesn't want him to come. Right? Very similar plot line if you think about it. Uh, in both cases, their love is stronger than the death that is around them. Antigone is tricked. She does, she is arrogant. She is flawed, right? She's disrespectful. She puts the entire last redoubt at risk, but she has love, right? She has a stronger love than the men of the Nightland. She has a stronger love than the creatures of the Nightland. Her brother's love changes the heart of one of the creatures of the Nightland and saves them. And because Antigone made the sacrifice, her brother is able to reincarnate within her lifetime, and she sees him again before her death. It's a beautiful ending to a beautiful story. So I think of that ending often. I found it very moving and quite ingenious.
Yes.
He comes up with a way to like Christianize the story of Antigone without losing, the fundamental messaging of it, right? And
Yep.
Antigone herself is a very interesting character because she is objectively wrong, right? Like over and over and over again, she is wrong. She is a fool for venturing into the Nightland, right? It's a doomed quest. She shouldn't even be attempting it. Uh, she is arrogant and disrespectful to her father, to her betrothed, to the people of the last redoubt who respect her as royalty, right? She puts them all at risk exactly in the way that they said she was going to. And she
And
does
hold
it.
just a second. Just to be clear, for the last story, another woman did go out and she birthed a monster that Perithus was barely able to strangle before it came into its power. So there were real problems with a woman going out into the night.
Yes. Yeah, so it was incredibly foolish for her to do this. And not only this, all of this is proven to be objectively, like, she is objectively wrong, right? Objectively, what everyone was saying, like, they were all right. She shouldn't have done this. The very fact that she survived is because and only because they were trying to trick her, right? Like, that's it. It was a concentrated plan on behalf of the creatures of the Nightland, who, by the way, are revealed in the story in a chilling, chilling line to be working in concert with each other for the destruction of humanity. Uh, like that is the only that's why they allowed her to succeed in her quest, right? Is that it gave them a chance to infiltrate the last redoubt. And they come within a hair's breadth of succeeding, only because Antigone figures it out at the very last second, and because one of the creatures of the Nightland is moved by her brother's love and changes his mind. Right?
Yep.
Do do they not succeed in their quest? And yet her brother is still dead. So she didn't even succeed in her quest, right? Which was hopefully to revive her brother, like with Murdath the Beautiful. But as it turns out, he really was dead. So By the time you reach this point of the story, Antigone has utterly failed and has been proven wrong. And yet there is a higher level here. The higher level is that although logically, rationally, objectively, Antigone is wrong, on the deeper, more fundamental level, Antigone is right. Because it is inhuman to leave somebody's body to rot in the nightland, right? It is not human. It is fundamentally monstrous, right? Deeply evil to leave someone's soul to get destroyed if there is something we could do to try and stop it. The reason that Antigone is the one who has to step up and do this is because the men fail. Now, this is something that you often hear as like a right wing talking point that I think is highly unfair, right? Like, oh, the reason that we have women in the military is because the men are failing and letting them do it. Now, I would say that it is a great shame of our country that women are in the military and in the police force. It's a disgusting travesty, and the fact that we as a civilized nation permit it is horrifying.
I
Um,
consider it like unfortunate, but fortunate that as some of this stuff was ramping up, there was a video of a woman. I don't remember what side of the conflict she was on, but essentially a drone caught a Slavic woman out in military gear, and she begs the drone to not slay her, and the drone strikes her, and then she survives it, horribly mangled, and then the drone strikes her again, killing her. This thing is disgusting. And of course, it was used for propaganda. I think it was a Russian woman killed by Ukrainian drones. Absolutely disgusting, soul destroying to watch. It made Donald Trump end this charade. Uh, there's other things that have come out too, where it's all rah rah until it happens. And when they come out, they're almost always incredibly damaged and dysfunctional. Most of the police officers who are also women, at least in where I live, tend to be lesbians. And I'm talking, and there was a famous case where a woman was schlepping with pretty much her entire police outfit, except her husband. And it was a huge scandal. And then she turned around and played victim. These things are disordered. These things are disgusting. If you have women going to war, and they're not having trouble, sure, there's fantasy like the Red Sonja, but in reality, it's more like Conan, where Conan is still the physical master, even if they have their wiles against them.
yes, and yeah, the point I'm bringing up with Cry of the Nighthound and with this whole right wing thing, like I consider it one of the great shames of our nation that we have women in combat and we have women in the police force. Uh, with that said, in Cry of the Nighthound specifically, which I do not consider to be analogous to real life, because in real life, it's women who were fighting for this, and it's women who push this, and it's women who wanted this for the most part, right? In which case, while men are to blame on a certain level, to act as if they're the ones who are like not doing their job, so women had to step up is an absurdity. But in Cry of the Nighthound, like we're obviously in a fictional scenario, and it's very clear that this is precisely what is happening. Over and over and over again, Antigone is telling everyone, you need to go out and help my brother. You need to go out and help my brother. We're in, and the last redoubt is implied to be in a state of civilizational decline, right? Where the men are not as heroic as they were in the past. So, quite literally, Antigone needs to take on a male job, just like, by the way, the original Antigone in the play Antigone. It is a direct adaptation of Antigone. Actually, a very accurate and straightforward one, as weird as it sounds, right? Like, the parallels are very one to one. She needs to take on a masculine duty because they're in a time of decline in the last redoubt, and the men are refusing to do it, right? In fact, they're in such moral decline that they don't even see what they're doing as a refusal, as a moral. they see it as pragmatism, but that's because it's a loss of heroism. Now, one of the great things about the story is that at the end of the story, when Antigone is going insane because she has been alone for like 70 or 80 years or something like that, uh, she is a very old woman who has lived alone for, decades upon decades, and she is clearly like losing her memory. But she sees into a special type of stone that like brings her sense back. And she can finally see for the first time with honesty her innermost self. And in a beautiful passage, she is horrified by it when she sees what her true self is like. She goes, what it, I can't remember the exact words, but it's like, what is this? What's this disgusting creature? Like, is that me? And then she says, but what's this golden strand running through the middle of it? And obviously, the implication here is, if you're paying any attention, is that's her love, right? It's the one saving grace of Antigone's entire personality, all of her flaws, is that she had a true golden strand of love at her core. And in seeing herself for who she truly is, her last words are like, "What have I done? Oh my God." Right? But then her brother tells her, like, "We've rescued you and you're not alone anymore." And that's how the story ends. But the genius here is that Antigone isn't right either, right? Like, she is more right than the people around her, but the reason that this is the case is because the people around her are so corrupt and are so flawed and in some cases like Creon evil, right?
Yes.
But Antigone is not a good person for the majority of the story. She is a sympathetic person, and ultimately she is on the right path, but she's not a good person.
Yeah. And it's you know, for modern writers, who don't quite get, what we're talking about, the problem becomes then, what are you sort of expecting these characters to do? Either you have to write a fundamentally false story with poor morals and poor ideals, nothing stories that have nothing to bring into the real world except for its sheer entertainment. The almost pornographic idea of a woman, beheading a man or something like that, which is of course its own genre. You must understand that these things are sick. There's a reason why we said, it's a shame to the nation that these things are happening in our nation. I have a character who's coming up in Pinkerton's Ghosts, who is such a character. And she, what, and for sport, the elves hunted her until she was able to, turn the tide on them and attack them where they're weak, which is when they give up their tithe to Tartarus. In a face down confrontation, she can't even really fight them. They're stronger, faster, they have charmed lives. But if she, blows off a elf's head at, 500 meters, well, that's more of an even fight for her. That elf should have seen it coming, quite frankly, poncy little bastards. But like what is the character arc though in that time? It's not, like Jack Morrow where it's sort of a glorification of violence for God. It's rough and tumble survival. She unlocks her love again when she finds a man who is also willing and able to slaughter elves, and he's able to do it in a more direct fashion that she is. You know, her role switches up. It becomes healthy again. And it's hard for writers to sort of get that their chosen thing is unhealthy. That, yeah, there's a reason why they have female starship commanders, but quite frankly, I've never been satisfied with that. Quite frankly, you could have like a woman colony ship commander because there's something of motherhood about that. You can have a woman, you know, like let's say you have a story where a man dies and the woman takes control. If she sort of leans into the mother archetype, including the discipline that a mother should bring, in the absence of a father, you know, you can have something that works in the deep nature of the soul. She is giving birth to a full colony. She is, taking, this life and burgeoning it up into fullness and glory, which is a woman's role as a mother. She isn't a virgin, which is sexless and, aggressive in a way, even though it doesn't have much real power beyond, what she has power over, like with Artemis versus Hera, where Artemis may torment the men who watch her bathe, but she may not torment the Queen of the Gods, who's something of a stepmother to her. Instead, she's not a more than a mother, but like a matron, like an old woman, who may be actually ossified. And while she might have folk wisdom for her, younger women under her control, perhaps talons, she's not actually giving birth to life. That is solely within the mother's responsibility of the virgin mother matron triad that are applied to women and are in fact very true to character. The matron may be something like a witch, but done well, she's actually the wise mother superior, or the grandmother who's keeping the family together, or a thousand other little things. The archduke's mother, who's wiser than him in politics, even though she'd never go to war for anything. And his arc may be to break himself free of her chains and go to war over a worthy cause, even though it may cost him everything. You see how these things are doing it. I'm just quoting these character interactions, and a thousand stories may flow from them. When you become ordered in your thoughts towards these things, it does create new ways to interact with the stories. Even though Cry of the Night Hound has Antigone as somebody who's usurping a man's position, even though the men being lesser stature than those who came before, which is forever the problem. Uh,
Hmm.
Even though there's section four, quite frankly, you know, as much as you might say you love your brother, but would you risk your soul destruction? You might say, well, it was a trap. They would have survived. Would they have figured out the trap? Would they have brought doom? It doesn't make it better. Just because you're able to, understand some aspect of it. Quite
Yeah,
frank,
there's nuances to the tale that make it very. It's one of the reasons it's so rich and worth revisiting, right?
yes,
Because Antigone is not clearly correct in the story. Never is she clearly correct, in fact. But her love is always praiseworthy.
yes.
Is the key.
And even then, she only barely understands at the last second that the Night Hound and the Nightlands in general are tricking her. You know, in the original Nightlands story, 300 Night Hounds savage a legion of 1,000 uh, men who go out into the night. That's they win. In the end, the men who go out into the night win, but they win first by slaughtering the men they came to save, so that they wouldn't get underfoot and be destroyed by the Night Hounds. And I say destroyed with a capital D. But
Mhm.
also because they use team tactics, whereas where the Night Hounds are a pack, they're not actually working together like a pack would. So there's it's it the more you understand things, the richer it gets. And even then, at the end, her fiance comes out and is one of the ones who save her from the last struggle, but he still doesn't. No, he kills himself. Hold on. What does he do?
I need to check it now.
Yeah.
I actually don't remember.
So he.
Uh,
But point is that they do go out to save her, but they rise from the ground with their camouflage cloaks. But in the end, she still needs to be punished for this immense risk. this risk that could have destroyed humanity even before they knew it's a trap. They could have captured her and had her give birth to a race of monsters. She makes it very explicit that the reason why she knows that she was out in the night hand for a full month is because her period comes and goes. It's there's no
Yep.
level of wrongness except to actually lay with the beasts or whatever that she doesn't perform in dangerous behavior to the last redoubt. I think there's a richness that is lost when people sort of remove the mother from the virgin matron mother triad, where people focus on the virgin and the matron, but in reality, they don't focus at all on what the mother can bring to their story. If it's a horror story, the mother can bring forth a monster, or she can raise a man to avenge her. In the Odyssey, um, uh, Calypso is kind of a virgin. Circe is kind of a matron, but Penelope is the mother. And she uses that power and wins because of it. Whereas I would actually say that Circe and Calypso lost. They never had control over Odysseus, who
Oh, Calypso or Circe, I mean, explicitly loses. Interestingly, in the Odyssey, she's actually converted straight, and in Epic too, I suppose.
uh,
She's converted straight up to an ally.
after her magic has no power over Odysseus. That's the key point.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's not about physical appearance either. It's about how the character acts. The Greeks understood the character of women. And so while we joke that they were hilariously misogynistic, if they had an opinion on women, it was misogynistic. But, in reality, I think they actually just understood the character better. In Rome, there isn't the same feeling that they understood the character, but also the Roman women accepted a different role than sort of the Greek women did. And it's hard to say because, like, the Greek women kind of just, were separate from society, but the Roman women advised their husbands.
As a
Pompey's what?
side note,
Mm,
I am baffled that I cannot find Nightland on my Kindle. I'm like, I read the book. I definitely have it.
I mean, I can grab the book if you want and look it up, but it's not important, really. Uh,
No, I just want it. I'm like, now I'm very confused.
yeah.
I'm like, how did I read the book?
So, to go on with what I'm saying,
Sorry, keep going.
yeah, not that, no, that was fine. There's, the loss of character in, sort of women characters is a great travesty. It sucker punches the sort of ability for characters to be characters, for Penelope to be Penelope, Circe to be Circe, and even Calypso to be Calypso. As aggressive and wicked as some of those characters are. If you're writing a female character, you can look through uh, sort of her life because you should have a sort of internal knowledge of how their life goes to uh, sort of figure out how they'll act. It was like with the character of Victoria. When she's introduced, she's sort of like struggling as an old virgin. She's aggressive, she's angry, she can't really connect to anything. But because she's so malformed by the evil circumstances that have been forced on her, that she's been forced to survive, she becomes, she turns into the mother when she marries Jack Morrow, when she realizes that this man is capable of immense violence and will perform immense violence to protect her. The ordering of a natural experience just isn't there, isn't capable of being there. So how does this work with the characters? You know, she becomes the mother once she's safe. You know, I as I look through and edit my own ideas, you know, it's sort of imagine it like a blender, right? I'm blending these ideas in my head to produce something. I keep coming back to the idea that once she's no longer in danger because she attaches herself to Jack Morrow, she instead immediately goes to the natural progression of the female character, into the mother and eventually the matron. Whatever that would look like. I don't care. I'm not gonna write that story. It's if you know Artemis doesn't have problems per se, but she her character is very static. Hera's character is very static. Other characters are very static, except for like Persephone and the Meter. But that's because they had their own like hidden cult about them. Juno, Hera, whatever, is always having issue with Zeus's infidelities. Artemis is always on the hunt, and even though she maybe breaks her vows for a character like Orion, depending on the author, uh, you know, it's not because of some sort of um, how do I want to put it? It's not because of some sort of horrible thing from our own times where she's mostly lesbian or she's mostly aro ace, which is a disgusting term, ace as associated with asexuality. No, it's not ace at all. uh you have these characters, when she interacts with Orion, it's not to produce children. It's because she has a love for him, for his hunting, for his skill. Let me look something up real quick. Does Artemis have any children? I know this sounds weird, but like Ares has children. In fact, the article that I just looked up, she was known as chaste because she never married and never had children. Uh, is she chaste because she didn't have sex, or is she chaste because she didn't marry and didn't have children? I would actually say that from the Greeks' understanding, she was quote unquote chaste because she was not married and didn't have children, not because she never had sex. They didn't burn the stories that had Orion having, perhaps sex with her, having that sort of romantic relationship. She never married him. She never had any kids with him. She stayed in the sort of nymph form. She stayed tied to her nature, but not growing nature like a mother would. Hera has children, even though she kind of abused most of them. Not a great mother, but she was a mother. And you had Hestia, who sort of submitted to the needs of the gods, and you had Athena, who was again doing her own thing. She had masculine roles, but it works, and we remember it not because of some sort of independent action. In reality, she served the will of Zeus faithfully. If she had been born a man, she would have challenged Zeus, but she was born a woman, therefore she served Zeus. She might have beefed with Poseidon over Athens and a few other things, and other characters as well. But in reality, it was never outside her role. There's a reason why they had Amazons, but not necessarily Athenian women going to battle. Hmm.
Yep. Yeah, I mean the idea behind the Amazons too was that they were a strange foreign race, right?
Yep.
And bizarre because of what they did with, how their women fought. Although there are no Athenian women, Theseus, who is an Athenian king, does marry Hippolyta, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. At one point, anyway, he's involved with Hippolyta.
He
But
does.
yeah, it's neither here nor there. Uh, yeah, I agree with you. So let's go back to what we were talking about. Like, why is all of this important? Like, one thing that is discussed is how you write men and women, and like what is the difference between writing for men and writing for women, because it can get tricky. There's a lot of mockery that surrounds this. I've often seen people claim very seriously that the best way to write female characters is simply to write them as male characters, then call them female characters. And I think the reason that this is, and by the way, this is often cited, like, for example, Ripley from Alien is cited as somebody who was written well in this way, and there are other examples as well who I can't recall off the top of my head.
Sure.
Uh, I think the reason that people will do this and claim that it works is because often when you try and write qua male or qua female, it ends up really bad,
Yes.
right? Because people just have no idea what they're doing, and it can be really awkward. This is where you get the very common meme, like it breasted boobily, you know. You know what I'm referring to, I'm sure, like because it pops up everywhere. People go, "Oh, whenever men describe a female character." Now,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
the irony, of course, is that almost always these exaggerated descriptions are written by women writing romance novels. Um, but yeah, we're not allowed to say that.
Yeah, I wish I could have hair like Fabio, but I don't.
hmm
Man,
But it's
Fabio.
like these exaggerated descriptions, like it's always men who are blamed when it's hilariously almost never men. Like for
Yeah.
example, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Hiromu Arakawa, like is on the record as saying, "I like my women to have vavoom and my men to be strong," or something like that. So everybody in Full Metal Alchemist is like incredibly attractive, and the reason is just because Hiromu Arakawa wanted it this way.
I
He
love
just
manga
liked it.
artists. They're always
Yes.
putting paid to the lies, more often than not.
Yep,
Yeah, and that's
I agree.
yeah. I guess
But to go
yeah.
go
Keep
and
going.
fin-
No, no, keep going.
yeah, I want to try and finish the point I was making. So I think it's true that if you really are just not sure, write it and try and make it as like, human motivation is human motivation, right?
Yes.
Ultimately, men and women are not so different that we can't understand each other at all, as much as we pretend, and that there's some comedy to be mined from this.
Yep.
We're all human, and people are going to understand, the motivation of like Ellen Ripley is I don't want to die.
Right.
Right.
But
Okay.
like sort of like the people who point out for Ripley, it's like okay, name one thing she does that's masculine. She works in a space trucking agency. No, like women worked in trucking from the beginning in roles like dispatch organization.
Well, the
She,
irony here is that the fact that Ripley is a woman actually adds a lot to the movie,
it
which we've
does.
discussed in the past. And they absolutely 100% made the correct call. Like, in fact, when you hear the story of how it happened, it sounds as if the director wanted to make Ripley a man specifically for like Ryan Johnson type subversion, as in there was no real reason for it to be subversive except they just, it's like, but it's a subversion, right? And a producer stepped in and said that's fucking stupid. uh we're not doing it, just make her a woman. And he went, fine. In this case, as much as we mock producers for doing this, the producer was 100% correct. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The final girl is the final girl for a reason in horror movies. But
Yep.
yeah, that's another story. Like, the point is, I think that advice, like, it's not the worst advice actually. As much, you might be surprised to hear this after this whole discussion, but I would say it's like good advice for beginners, right?
Yep.
Like, because there's definitely, like, you will probably write a passable character if you don't focus on specifically masculine or feminine traits and instead focus on, like, understandable human motivations, right?
Yep.
Like, there is nothing necessarily wrong with that. However, that's beginner stuff. You know,
Yes.
like if you're really trying to write realistic human beings, the fact is that men and women are different, and you can't ignore those differences forever.
Yep.
Uh, it's very interesting because I just came back from marriage prep, and I'm going to marriage prep at an old-fashioned Catholic parish
Anthony,
that
when were you
are.
gonna tell me that you were gonna get married? Anthony, you've been keeping
Oh
stuff
yeah,
from me.
by the way, I'm getting married. Anyway, uh,
Oh.
that's another meme. By the way, it's like men versus. There's a pretty good version of this meme. It's like men versus women. It's like women. Oh, I go. Chad proposed to me yesterday, and it's like, oh my god, and you waited a full 24 hours to tell me. And then it's like men, and it's like, oh, by the way, bro, I got married last week. Congrats, bro. I thought you were gay. And then uh, pretty good.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, anyway, I come and I went. We're going to like an old Latin mass parish, so the wedding prep manual is like literally from the 1960s. It's great. I love it. And there's an entire section of the manual that is all just like what are the differences between men and women, generally speaking, and it's all and it's like based. It's just like men are generally stronger, women are generally more emotional, but it goes like this for like a full page and a half of common stereotypes of men and women. It's great. Um, yeah, the point being that you're eventually going to need to like deal with these differences. I don't know how well I succeeded. Maybe I succeeded very well, maybe not. It's up to other people to judge, I suppose. But
Yeah.
in writing Violet, I'm always very, very mindful of the way that I write Violet, in that she is a very different person from Sean, for one thing, but also that she is a woman, right? And I also designed Violet specifically with an extremely feminine role, uh, like very classically feminine role, right? Like literally, if she has an arc, so much as you could call it one, in the stories up to this point, the story's continuing, of course, and it's not over. But in the last season, like her arc was basically working out that she wasn't going to end up ever being one of the heroes. She was going to be the person that Sean came home to. Could she accept that, right? And what that role entailed, and ultimately she does, because
Yep.
that's not an irrelevant role. She does in the last season. In this season, they're broken up. You'll have to stay tuned to find out why.
That's
Um,
crazy. Crazy.
crazy stuff. But in season two, yeah, the whole arc, insofar as there was one, of Violet was her realizing that has an extremely dangerous job. Can she be the person that Sean comes home to? Right? Does
Right.
she want to be the person that Sean comes home to? And, can she deal with that being her role? Because it is her role, and I wrote her very intentionally with this, with this in mind for her character. Um, you write Mother Morrow is a more complex character, and and she's doing. You had to have the difficulty of having her do like typical Pinkerton's ghost things, but in a feminine way, and I think you succeeded. From an outside perspective here, right?
Thank you.
Like
Yes.
I think that you were successful in what you were trying to do. Or you could read Eowyn in The Lord of the Rings, who is a beloved female character, right? Often misunderstood,
Yep.
right? Eowyn is not a feminist character, and very specifically not. So this is actually worth the tangent, so I'm going to talk about this for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
What is Eowyn's role in The Lord of the Rings? Like, what is her arc? She's a beloved character. I love the character, right? She's great.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, well, her father is going off to war, her brother is going off to war, and she is going to be left behind. The man she loves, Aragorn, does not love her back, and this deeply, deeply, deeply depresses her. She's going to be stuck home alone with with no hope of a happy ending in sight for her, because the man that she loves, if he doesn't die, does not love her. So she essentially decides to commit suicide. Uh, this is how it's framed in the story. How does she decide to commit suicide? She decides to saddle up and ride into battle. She would rather do this than be left behind and wait for a hopeless future, right? Does she think that she is going to survive? No, she actually doesn't want to. Uh, I don't recall if this is said explicitly, but the implication, I think it is. But even if it isn't, the implication is like really, really heavy. That she really is doesn't care at the very least if she lives or dies in this battle. She would just
Yeah.
rather do this than wait home alone because to her there's nothing really worth living for. Her man is, there is no man that she is waiting for. There is no future that is worth waiting for. She would rather just die in battle with her brother and her father. So, what happens in the battle? In the battle, she faces off against the Witch King, and it's revealed that she is essentially the solution to a prophecy,
Yep.
along with Mary. The famous scene, but I am no man, right? She
Yep.
manages to kill the Witch King. Uh, a mighty deed, arguably the most impressive thing that anyone does in the entire story. I mean, I guess wounding Shelob is also up there because Shelob is like essentially a sort of, I'm trying to think of the word, eldritch
Demigod.
abomination. Yeah,
Yeah.
eldritch abomination. Like
Yeah.
in one of the funniest moments of the story, the orcs, when they discover that Shelob has been horribly wounded, rationally assume that an elf lord is running around in the tunnels. It's great. So one of the two most impressive things anyone does. I would say Frodo destroying the ring, but Frodo doesn't destroy the ring. He almost destroys the ring. However, I suppose you could also add in Frodo getting the ring to Mount Doom, right? So there's three things that you could say: Frodo getting the ring to Mount Doom, the killing of the Witch King, and Sam wounding Shelob are probably the three most impressive feats of any characters in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Okay, so Eowyn does this. But what happens next is what's really interesting to me, especially. Now she has fulfilled a prophetic destiny. She has done. She had some sort of mysterious purpose for being at the battle that has now been fulfilled.
Yep.
Does she die? So does she die? No, actually, she survives the battle. Is she happy? Well, no, because she went into the battle intending to die. And at the end of the battle, nothing has changed. Aragorn still doesn't love her. Her father is dead. In fact, things are worse.
Yep.
So she killed the Witch King. I mean, that's good. She's glad she did it, but in terms of her personal situation, so what? And notably, this is exactly what we see. Eowyn is still depressed at the end of the battle. Nothing has changed. She isn't any better. Masculine glory has not given her fulfillment. So what does? Faramir gives her fulfillment. Eowyn is only able to rise from her depression and find happiness and joy in her life when Faramir courts her. She has the love of a good and noble man. In
Yep.
fact, a great man. And
The greatest man
this
in
is,
Gondor. Except, of course,
yes,
Aragorn himself.
the greatest man in Gondor besides Aragorn. And it is only with the love of Faramir that Eowyn is able to find purpose. Because Tolkien was not a fool. He knew what the Bible says, he knew what human nature tells us, and that's that women's compass in life should be a good man.
Hmm.
I am saying something that is probably controversial nowadays among most people. I'm sure not among our
No,
audience at this point.
not our audience, but like it's controversial because our enemies Like in previous eras, our enemies were the Muslim, or infighting that has become religious, say during the um, Peasants' War, or some foreign power like that came out of nowhere, like the Mongols or the Huns. But those enemies, no matter what your opinion on it versus the Protestant versus Catholics, those enemies don't deny reality. In the end, the Protestants and Catholics weren't arguing over some sort of esoteric Enlightenmentier virgin philosophy. They were arguing over the most important thing in our lives: how to worship Jesus Christ. Like that's worth killing over. It's part of
Yep.
the impetus that brought us to all the different nations we colonized. You
Very
know,
Chestertonian of you to say, too. Because Chesterton, I'm actually going to expand on that, and we're going to talk about Dale Alquist later.
okay,
But I'm actually going to expand on that for a moment. That's Chestertonian of you. In Chesterton's books, Heretics and Orthodoxy, he makes the point that
which I've
people
never
will,
read.
I haven't read them in full. I've started them, but he makes this point in the books. People will say that, we used to be barbaric for killing heretics, and Chesterton argues, as a matter of fact, heresy is the only thing worth killing over. Or one of the only things at least,
Yes.
right? Worth killing over. That they were more sane for burning heretics than we are, not less.
Yes.
That's not to say you can and he said, in fact, one of the great madnesses of the modern age is that somebody believes they will smugly, and that it's a brilliant insight from Chesterton. He says there's this insanity where people will smugly announce that they are in fact a heretic to the contemporary orthodoxy, and they will be smug about it like it's some sort
Yes.
of badge of honor. He's like, this is insane. It's completely insane. He goes, and no heretic ever in history up to this point ever would have said this. He said they knew that being a heretic was bad. What they would have claimed is that, in fact, they were Orthodox and you were all the heretic.
Yes.
And this is true from like the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation, at the very least, was an argument between two groups of sane people
Yes.
who understood the gravity of the argument. They were precisely correct. What they were, as you point out yourself, as Chesterton would acknowledge, what they were arguing about was nothing less than the correct way to worship God. This is the most important thing in the world. And neither side would have ever copped to being a heretic. You think Luther would have accepted, well, I guess I am a heretic? Of course not. He
Absolutely
denied it
not.
to his dying day. He never would have accepted it. He didn't accept it. He did not consider himself a heretic. He would not consider himself a heretic. Calvin never, ever considered himself a heretic. Would be offended at the... He would be mortally offended. I think offended actually undersells it. He would challenge you to a duel,
He
right?
would
He
foam
would
at the
kill.
mouth.
Yeah,
Yes.
he would kill over the implication that he were a heretic. Literally kill. That's what they were fighting over.
Yep.
That these people, they would not be proud of the idea that they were heretics to the orthodoxy. Even if they were the only ones who thought it, they would claim, I'm orthodox, everybody else is a heretic.
Yep.
Because orthodox did not mean consensus, it meant correct.
And orthodox is a great word to use because now they, until just recently, in fact, the law of the land was anti orthodox. Not just unorthodox, but anti orthodox. About men, about women, about everything. We have 4 years with Trump and other people where we can push back, and we need to push back as hard as we can. If somebody says to you, well, gender roles, you ask them what gender means. Like, you don't just push them back from, like, well, I don't think so. You tell them, oh, gender? Is that word coined by the child rapist John Money? Dr. John Money, who sexually abused children until they killed themselves, in our lifetimes? My lifetime anyway. Uh, it's one of those things where we can push back against this stuff, but not because it's like we want to get back to the '90s. yeah. No, we're pushing back because we have God on our side, but because we have a truth, an ultra truth that we can cling to. We have the worship of Christ. It's almost a pity that the Protestant and Catholic wars, ceased because now there's no like threat to being a Catholic or a Protestant from each other. There's only a threat from the world, and the world's been doing its damnedest to infiltrate everything it can get its hands on. You have entire this is within Protestant circles, but you have entire pastors who lose their good ministries, thousands of good sermons, because they had a fling and they didn't repent of it before death and they didn't handle it, their sin. You have Catholics, where I've met men in my own real life. This isn't over the internet. These are men I have stared eye to eye, face to face, who have said, of the sexual scandals of which are so famous. You know, these things we can do to push against it. We can attack, and expect us to still ourselves to remain platformed as long as we're respectful. And I don't mean respectful as in submitting to the enemy. I mean respectful in not swearing too much. Not using slurs unneedfully. Uh, these things, are in our power to do, and by pushing back against the role of the dominant woman who doesn't need no man, of the sex object, of the puppet that in reality would never exist. And I'm not even arguing for realism here. I'm just saying that there's no point to it. If you play a video game where, like, I'm playing the Sedatal, the reason why I chose it is because the main character is a woman formed cyborg, who, can double jump and stuff like that. The only reason she's a woman is entirely aesthetically. In reality, she is a robot. And if a man did it, like in Doom, nobody would question it. Samus Aran wears power armor. And when she doesn't have armor, she has like one health point. And is light as a feather. And, the only reason she's, dangerous is because she has like jet boots and an ultra whip. Uh, mm, uh, you know, the the proper form of things can be respected, maintained, and kept within proper boundaries. If you're wanting to write a character and you want a woman character, you know, the triad of the Virgin Mother Matron is a great place to start to understand characterization, to understand how to interact with the world that you're trying to build if you're not willing to make it, again, a pornographic fantasy. Uh, you know, the the world wants certain things out of you. It wants submission. It wants Christians to be silent. There's a reason why some street preachers get harassed and some don't. It's entirely based on whether they're preaching the gospel. I've seen it time and time again. Uh, you know, Not that they're harassed all the time, but I'm saying that, when I've seen street preachers harassed, they've usually started preaching the gospel. Usually, and then some Muslims or something come around. The outside, the enemies that we used to fight, you know, which got us on the whole Orthodox side tangent, never really denied reality. In fact, they were closer to reality in the worldly sense, in the unchristian sense, than the Christians were, to the worldly reality. The Christians were closer to God. Muslims treated women like animals. If, quite frankly, in a court of law, the animal could have a stronger testimony than a woman could. You look at China. Many times, Chinese women were basically ornamentation. Their feet broken and tormented. You know, not, the only time they took a voice was as, a dowager empress. And even then, most of them were cruel bitches. There's no other way to describe them. They were just cruel and horrible. Uh, even for certain places like Japan, where women had, a bit more respect, a bit more, autonomy, whatever you want to call it. And I don't even like those words. They had a they were a higher status than the animals the family might own. They still, were, you know, realistic about their state of the world in a worldly sense. So you look at South Korea, which was never a very Christian nation, and they've gone whole hog into the world, into the service of Satan, for tech and money and peace in their time, and they can't even breed. There have been hellish, virulent anti-male ideas that have come from South Korea that are unspeakable, if even half are true. You have in other places, where it just doesn't matter and women are given license to their lusts. And I'm not just talking about America or Great Britain, where at the point they protect Muslim immigrants over the women that, are being stabbed by them. Like it's clear that feminism, that the gender ideologies, that these things are utter failures. They're makers and of misery. In reality, women left to their own tend to be wives and mothers and daughters and matrons, grandmothers. Whether they're good or not, is up to them, between them and God. But they tend to just sort of flow into that. In the end, whatever the red pill guys, and I don't mean like necessarily Vox Day, but also some of the things that Vox Day has said. And we like Vox Day here, but some of the red pill stuff. They almost make women out to be automatons. If you're not alpha, they'll betray you. And even then, they might betray you if somebody's more alpha or sigma or whatever. In reality, I don't actually see that. I see women being loyal to their men. Like when a woman gets really drunk, she'll off, and she has a solid relationship. I see them hang on to their husbands. Like he's a rock, or giving him affection or something like that, unasked for. Clearly that there is another, deeper, ultra truth below the truth that is set up as the law of the land. In the end, what the red pill guys, and I don't necessarily mean Vox Day in this, but I do mean Roosh, what they were picking up were slags and skags, the detritus of womankind, who are willing to open their legs for anything for a bit of fun. Uh, you know, these things, are useful to learn, like game and keeping frame. But it's just another sort of aspect of the same gender ideologies that we must burn at the stake now. And you must burn it within your own life, even at a certain amount of cost. I make jokes about this sort of thing at my work, and that was before Trump was elected. They laugh. As long as you're not being an aggressive asshole about it, you can get away with way more than you think you can. Uh, you know, you just have to sort of learn where the boundaries are. You have to have those social graces. And of course, to you virtuous women who may or may not be listening in, because I know you do sometimes, thank you for being good examples of this stuff. In the end, we joke about psyops here, like the COVID vaccine psyop. But in reality, the women have been psyoped worse than the men in many regards. If you keep up that fight, you'll find that if you social pressure can work against you, but it can also work for you, can't it? I'm sure there's somebody you can influence in your life. I mean, it's not like you just want to what's the phrase? Lie down and take it? No, 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 no. You know, to use feminist terms, you've got power too, don't you? These things, I had a sudden image, Anthony, of hold them down. Except the idea was women social pressuring each other, to murder boy toy Odysseus. Um, anyway, uh, we are now that Trump's in office and Trump's proving himself to not be a traitor to our cause. Um, he's coming in, and it seems to be coming in with vengeance. We have an opportunity to fight. Not to Fed posts per se, but to start doing more and more things like this. Um, to this end, we're looking at guests. I'm going to be looking at guests to talk about things. My church is hosting a conference on gender, and I'm going to talk to the guy who's running it, and I'm like, hey, what can we do about this? What can we do to remove the word gender and just call it, the sexes or something? What can we do to rewrite reality even more? Because he's quite based. He's a younger man than Anthony. Fresh, baby faced. But it's if it's in my power as a humble Gen Y to influence culture rather than to be influenced by that, I think I'm going to take it and do so for the glory of God. This crusade's only beginning. Uh, I don't. We joke on the internet about jihad, but in reality, it's crusade. Jihad is screaming madness coming from the desert, bursting forth like an aquifer breaking, like a dam breaking, to wipe away everything in its path. In the end, we reach out to the cross and we find power coming down from the cross to us. All right. That's my monologue. I want to thank you guys for listening. We do have some guests coming up. Why don't you tell us about the big one, Anthony?
Yeah, on February 16th, we are going to have a very, very highly respected scholar
Hold on.
joining
Is
the
it the
show.
16th or is it the ninth?
I thought it was February 16th.
Hold on a second.
I better check because you don't want to get that wrong. We're gonna have to be real nice with the show. Yeah, February 16th.
Okay.
Okay, I'm correct. Yep. Anyway, so on February 16th, we're actually going to be having a very, very highly respected scholar joining the show. This is
Mm-hmm.
somebody who has made multiple appearances at places like Oxford University, giving presentations to people, was interviewed on Pints with Aquinas, is the head of the G.K. Chesterton Society, and is currently championing Chesterton's cause for canonization in the Catholic Church. If you don't know who this is the one and only Dale Alquist. When I say that he is a respected scholar, I am understating it. Dale is the leading expert on G.K. Chesterton in the world. And as I said, he's not just any scholar, he's not just a guy with a degree. He has done private lectures at Oxford University, at many universities, in fact. He does touring at various places around the country. And to my great shock, he agreed to appear on our show.
Yeah,
February 16th. Ben and I have been brushing up on our Chesterton. Ben just read The Man Who Was Thursday for the first time, so
that's
he is
right.
now officially in the club. He has read Chesterton. I
I
have
like it.
read a couple. Yep, I've read a couple of works by Chesterton, but I'm gonna read some more, and I can promise you now that this is going to be a good interview. Like, I'm going to put the work in to actually organize and make sure that we have interesting things to discuss with, I believe, Doctor, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to call him
Um,
Mr. Alquist
I think it's a
since I'm not
doctor.
100% certain. I think it's Dr. Alquist.
Is a Hold on, canonization for G.K. Chesterton. I thought that required like miracles and stuff like that.
It does, but the whole process is that you need to have a cult to you already, literally a cult, like a
Yeah,
what's it called, a cultus, a group of people who pray to you.
yeah.
And you need somebody to start championing your cause, and then you're a servant of God. So once
Oh,
you so you first your cause is opened. I don't even think the cause has been opened for Chesterton yet. Then you become a servant of God if they say like you've lived a holy life. and then you become a venerable. That's the next step. Then I think I don't know the exact number or anything. I would need to look it up to memorize it, but it's something like one miracle attached to your name. You can be beatified. And if you have two miracles that are confirmed by the church and you pass like a sort of panel, you can be canonized. So Dale Alquist has been trying to get a bishop to be his champion for Chesterton's cause for canonization.
Mm.
On the website, the last update is that the bishop didn't say anything, but that's from years and years ago. When he was interviewed on Matt Fradd, he expressed optimism that another bishop would soon be pushing Chesterton's cause forward. So I
Good.
will definitely be asking him about this because I'm curious.
Because I'm kind of curious too. Because to me, from a non-Catholic mindset, but just from my mindset, it's like, yeah, sure, he could be a doctor in the church. Like it's like the amount of theology that was in the ending of The Man Who Was Thursday was insane. Like he was denser than John C. Wright, and like I'm like sitting there thinking about it, and then I'm like, oh, that just
Oh
clicked,
yeah,
and then
Chesterton is a generational level genius. He's one of those people where you, if you know who Chesterton is, you're probably a fan of him, right?
yes,
Like, and if you don't know who he is, he's also one of those people where he was enormously influential in ways that people don't even realize, like in many different things. For example, the reason that we read Dickens in school is because of G.K. Chesterton. He is the person who plucked Dickens out of like the populist writer, kind of. I'm trying to think of the word. Like ghetto, that's it. The populist writer ghetto he was kind of stuck in, where they go, yeah, okay, he's popular, but he's not, a real literature, right? Chesterton is the critic who he was a very respected critic. He had a newspaper column, right?
mm,
Um, and he's actually, if he were to become a saint, we would have more writing from Chesterton than almost every other saint combined, because
amazing.
he had a newspaper column for years and years and years. So it would be really interesting.
Yeah, that is
Anyway,
interesting.
that
Yeah,
yeah, he's the reason that we read Charles Dickens in school. It's Chesterton. And I read his book. Like there is a book of essays on all of Dickens' published novels that Chesterton wrote. It is excellent. I'll link it to you. All of Chesterton's work is free online, which is great. Makes it
yes,
very easy. But his book of essays on Dickens is superb. He makes the point with Dickens that Dickens was such a populist writer that, in fact, even though he agrees that it is a fallacy to say what is popular is always the best, with Dickens, this is virtually always the case because
yes,
he was so attuned to the popular consensus. So he believes that Dickens' best works are his most popular works, meaning he believes his best work is the Pickwick Papers. And he also, and I am very, very happy to read I was very happy to read this because I felt very validated. He is a great admirer of A Christmas Carol. He believes A Christmas Carol is very good, and I think he has a high opinion of A Tale of Two Cities as well, which is probably my favorite full length
yeah.
Dickens novel. So
I would be.
I was very gratified to read that. But yeah, they're excellent essays on all of Dickens' published works. He has some really great essays on Shakespeare as well. One of the points that he makes, once again, he's such a breath of fresh air in terms of like common sense. He makes a point about Hamlet, that Hamlet is one of the most misunderstood of Shakespeare's plays. That, and I completely agree with him. Basically, he makes the point that Hamlet is like, people who think of Hamlet as a great skeptic are completely wrong. He goes, that entirely misses the point of Hamlet. Like, that's exactly not what he was. It's like Hamlet actually acted completely and perfectly rationally from the beginning to the end of the play.
Yep.
That never at any point did he make a wrong decision. He does kill, what's his name, Polonius,
Yes.
but even the death of Polonius was entirely rational given the information that Hamlet was working off of at the time. And he even reacts to that in a completely rational and correct way.
Yep.
Like this idea that he was I really, really. This is now a tangent, but I like this topic, so yeah.
We can
Um,
talk about it later.
yes, we'll talk about it another time. I'm gonna mention one very quick thing. I really, really like. There was like a Facebook thing that came out, and I actually think it was correct. It was almost a meme where they said the real problem with Hamlet and Othello is that both of them were the heroes of the wrong story. That in fact, if you switched Hamlet to Othello and Othello to Hamlet, both of them would have solved the problems in their respective stories immediately and with very little trouble
Yes.
because Othello would have acted very quickly
Yep.
and would not have worried would not have worried as much over the morality of it, and Hamlet would have been far more skeptical and would have been much less easy to fool.
Yes.
So
That's a good one. That's a good post because it's like Iago could probably like Hamlet could think his way out of Iago's lies, and Othello could have cut the BS and revenged himself on Claudius,
yeah,
which
in
is
fact, I'm going to Ben. Since we're going to be talking to Dale Alquist and we're all reading up on Chesterton anyway, I'm going to link you to Chesterton's Hamlet article because it's really, really good.
yeah, like there's a guy called Academic Agent, and he's a Shakespeare scholar among other things, political commentator, and he brought up a lot of the same stuff that you've mentioned with G.K. Chesterton. That Hamlet essentially was a rational, legal mind, and when he wanted to strike the second he knew for sure, that the Claudius was guilty, and not before, because otherwise it would be murder if he got it wrong. Anyway,
Yeah, he says there is one little point upon which I think the public have mistaken Hamlet, not through themselves, but through the critics. Mean this, that everybody in the modern world has talked of Hamlet as skeptic. The mere fact of seeing the play acted very finely and swiftly, and he mentions two actors who I don't know, has simply swept the last rags of this heresy out of my head. The really interesting thing about Hamlet was that he was not a skeptic at all. He did not doubt at all, except in the sense that every sane man doubts, including popes and crusaders. Primary point is quite clear. If Hamlet had been a skeptic at all, there would have been no tragedy of Hamlet. If he had had any skepticism to exercise, he could have exercised it at once upon the highly improbable ghost of his father. He could have called that eloquent person a hallucination or some other unmeaning thing, have married Ophelia and gone on eating bread and butter. This is the first evident point. The tragedy of Hamlet is not that Hamlet is a skeptic. The tragedy of Hamlet is that he is very much too good a philosopher to be a skeptic. His intellect is so clear that he sees at once the rational possibility of ghosts. But the
yeah,
other mistake of regarding Hamlet as a skeptic has many other instances. The whole theory arose of quoting stilted passages out of their context, such as to be or not to be, or, much worse, the passage in which he says, with an almost obvious gesture of fatigue, why then 'tis none to you, for there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Hamlet says this because he is getting sick of the society of two silly men. But if anyone wishes to see how entirely opposite is Hamlet's attitude, he can see it in the same conversation. If anyone wishes to listen to the words of a man who is in the most final sense not a skeptic, here are his words. This goodly frame the earth seems to me a sterile promontory, this most excellent canopy the air, look you, this brave overhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Oddly enough, I have heard this passage quoted as a pessimistic passage. It is perhaps the most optimistic passage in all human literature. It is the absolute expression of the ultimate fact of the faith of Hamlet. His faith that, although he cannot see the world as good, yet certainly it is good. His faith that, though he cannot see man as the image of God, yet certainly he is the image of God. So, and I will stop there. But brilliant. Like, that insight legitimately, as Chesterton often does, like, rewrote my brain. And it's like, made me completely rethink everything I read when I read Hamlet. It just totally blew me away. But okay, we'll end it here because we're getting late.
Yeah.
Any last words, Ben?
No. Just remember, we have, as I've said before on this show, we have 4 years. There's no guarantee that whoever will replace Trump will be anything like Trump, as much as we like J.D. Vance in the end. Our choices that we make must be for the long term. I'm working on things. Anthony's working on things. Uh, I had pneumonia, but now I feel better. So it's like, get back to work. I've got stuff to do that's due on the 31st. I've got to get it done for the future I want. Anthony has things he has to get done for the future he
Yep.
wants. And you, dear listener, have things that you must do for the future that you want. Now is the time to act. Bring forth the sacred fires in your own soul that God implanted from the beginning. Raise the fires up to consume, burn out, rather than be extinguished. Thank you, and good night.
We're off the air.